Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. Another episode for you. If you've not listened yet to our one reflecting on all the issues at the Copa America and Euros, that is there on the feed. But this is counting down to the Olympics. And joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and Martyn Ziegler from the Times. Have any of you been for a dip in a river?
Not yet, but somebody has. Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, fulfilled her promise to swim in the River Seine to show that the water quality would be good enough for the triathlon and the marathon swimming competitions at the Paris Olympics. Now, I saw that and I thought she was insane.
In the Seine. Get it?
Right, that's your quota of those puns and awful puns used up.
No, I mean, there's obviously this is a big issue for Paris, isn't it? They've spent £1 billion or €1 billion anyway,
just on
trying
the
to
water.
get just on the water quality.
Couldn't they have drained it and filled it with some Evian instead?
Yes, that might have been cheaper.
Martyn, £1 billion or €1 billion, whatever. That's a lot of money. Is that just? They have to maintain that. Otherwise, that would be an awful kind of dereliction of public money if that's what it was. If it's just
obviously they say this isn't just for the Olympics, but this is a sort of longer term cleanup operation. But
yeah, maybe champagne would have been cheaper.
The people will be swimming. Madame Hidalgo and her friends, her amis, they'll be swimming in the Seine next year and the year after as well at this time of year.
Well, let's see. Let's just see. Yeah.
This actually brought back memories from many years ago in British politics in 1990 when BSE was all the concern, mad cow disease, and a government minister ended up trying to feed a burger to his daughter. John Gummer.
John Selwyn Gummer. Yeah, that was. I think he became the object of such ridicule, and his poor daughter. I think she's probably still suffering the effects.
I did see some journalists though go in the Seine as well to test it out. I mean, we always get these sorts of Olympic issues, don't we? Rio had it with its water. Well, with Tokyo, it was more about obviously pandemic issues. So quite a familiar cycle of news though as we sort of build up to the Paris Games and how safe, how much confidence can people have in all the organisation of it. But it's actually integrity issues that are really at the fore. Can we trust who is competing with scrutiny over doping cases? I mean, there are so many to begin with here. Which one?
Well, I think let's begin with Jay Jones, the double Olympic taekwondo champion from the UK.
Someone who's probably benefited from the Euros dominating.
Yes, good point, actually. This sort of went under the radar, didn't it? That she, in December, a doping control officer turned up at her hotel in Manchester at 6:50 a.m. one morning and said we needed to give a urine sample, and she refused. That normally carries a 4-year ban, but she didn't get anything, Tariq.
No, she didn't, and the case is just, it opens all sorts of avenues now. And I think will affect confidence in the British anti-doping system for years to come. Basically, the claim was she was so dehydrated from training that she wasn't thinking straight, and she was incapacitated in her decision making, and that went to appeal, and she got off basically on this. Now, what that suggests is people can claim something like this, and the whole point of the anti-doping system works. The only way it works is if it's fair across the board, and if there's no kind of carve-outs like this. You have to be strict liability, I think is a word they use in anti-doping, and other athletes will be thinking, hang on, what about me?
So the reason given was that she became irrational, suffering a complete loss of her cognitive senses, and they talked about this would be well able to cause a complete loss of cognitive capacity such as cognitive impairment, such that it fully explains the situation in question. That was the report from Dr. Roger Howells, an independent consultant psychiatrist who was instructed by Jay Jones's side. Just step back. I mean, UK anti-doping has taken a lead on issues in Russia. It actually went in as part of the cleanup after the state-sponsored doping scandal. I'm not suggesting it's anything on that level, but when you adopt such a high ground, it's quite difficult to explain a case like this and the conclusion.
Absolutely.
The other thing is that in the sort of full written reasons, they say there's a sort of medical issue which they can't go into, give any details of. That the both J. Jones's appointed psychiatrist and one that they appointed themselves had diagnosed. So we don't know what that was at all. But if you're looking from the outside, and I spoke to Renee Ann Shirley, the former executive director of Jamaica's anti-doping agency, she said it just looks like this is a double Olympic champion who appears to be sort of being protected by UK anti-doping. That's how it appears from the outside.
This is the issue. I was speaking to someone very senior in anti-doping who doesn't have confidence in the structure of this, because what you're asking is for each country essentially to control its own athletes. And when you're coming close to an Olympics, which is, the biggest flag waving event bar none, that confidence is eroded when you have cases like this. There almost should be third parties, not national anti-doping organizations, that are responsible for things like this, because this was UCAD. That said, WADA, if it wanted to, could appeal this.
So why isn't it?
It's a really good question. I have, await their answer.
Because this is about wider faith in WADA, and we'll get onto the latest in the Chinese swimmers case. UCAD's own statement, and let's remember they are a UK government agency, they said that following a full UCAD investigation and results management process, the applicable period of ineligibility has been limited on the basis that Miss Jones bore no fault or negligence for an anti-doping rule violation. UCAD reached this conclusion having due regard to the specific and exceptional circumstances of Miss Jones's case, fully supported by all the available evidence, including compelling independent medical expert reports and available medical records. And as for J. Jones herself, she said, the moment it all started, I didn't grasp the situation I was in and what could happen. I gave a negative sample later that day.
Yeah, now that was interesting as well. So the timeline here, 12 hours later, she did give a sample. But 12 hours is a lot of time in the current anti-doping environment. Talking to experts, the washout periods, if you have been doping, there's no suggestion she had been, are hours. So they have to do these spot checks. You have to give the sample. Then doing it 12 hours later, it's neither here nor there, because if there was a substance, there's a chance that could be washed out of the system by then.
One other interesting thing on UK anti-doping is when somebody has a doping violation, that they spotted a doping violation, they've confirmed that, just that she didn't get sanctioned from it. They normally issue a press release, put it on their social media accounts. They didn't in this case. UK anti-doping, they just put it on their website. And I asked them why the reason for this, and they said because of the sensitive nature of the case, including the sort of medical conditions.
But it's enough to be able to put on the website, but you can't press release it. And as I said, they are ultimately, of course, a government agency. They receive public funding.
I think that was a mistake as far as I'm concerned.
Well, not the only doping case around. The US.
Yeah, this is Wes Kitts, another really kind of interesting and worrying development in the anti-doping. He's a weightlifter. He's accepted a 1-month sanction from the International Testing Agency, even though he tested positive for a prohibited substance. And the way he got out of this is that the substance is only banned in competition. It's a stimulant, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it, a very, very long name, but it is a banned substance. He said, although he appeared at the competition,
Methahexamethylene.
That's the one. Well done, Rob. He did not intend to compete at the competition due to injury. So this fellow, he shows up at the event with the banned substance in his body, and they say, "Oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, I'm not." And he was on the list of competitors. In fact, he didn't lift the weight up. essentially cleared him. Again, it's something that if we have time and people can report this out, it'd be really fascinating to know what the chain of events are here. But again, we've been talking a lot about, the Chinese swimmers case, for example, and the world's gone nuts about this, saying, this is outrageous. The way this process hasn't been handled properly, potentially depriving, clean athletes of medals at Tokyo. And then we're seeing these kind of stories all around the world, maybe not at the extent of the 23 positives in China, but it just doesn't provide a very decent picture of, do we trust the anti-doping world?
And this is an American athlete, and the United States Anti-Doping Agency is leading the concerns about how the World Anti-Doping Agency responded to these cases around the 23 Chinese swimmers who were ultimately...
That's right, yeah. This was the trimetazidine, the heart stimulant, which is a prescription-only drug and had never been found to be a contaminant before in any case ever. And the one that led to the Russian ice skater, 15-year-old ice skater Kamila Valieva, being given a years-long ban. So this was a big scandal.
Hearing this week from a Dutch swimmer, Arno Kaminga, speaking to the Reuters agency, saying, it's a lose-lose situation for swimming lovers and also for the Chinese swimmers themselves, but also saying the problem is in the way in which it was handled. For them to just cover it up, not say anything, instead of being upfront and transparent with us, I think that's where the problem lies for most people. Whether they're positive or not, I don't know. I can't say anything about it. I hope I can trust WADA and that the conclusion was right. I'm just disappointed in the way it was handled. That's the view of one swimmer, and still questions about how it's been handled and the subsequent reports that even were.
Yeah, so the report that WADA had asked a guy called Eric Cottier, it's independent investigator, has been published in an interim form, and World Aquatics, the swimming organization, has published its own separate report in the last week or so. The first one, the Cottier report, it obviously mainly clears WADA. WADA appointed report, says WADA's fine. But if you look at the details in that, there's an incredible line in there, in the annex. It says WADA's head of science, Mr. Rabin, and his deputy, essentially, both found the Chinese story hard to believe. So you would have thought there'd be extra investigative effort and force, given that your top two scientists have got doubts about this. And in all the months, all the weeks of WADA press conferences, briefings, statements, they never said any of that into the media, to the athletes, to anybody else. It's only found in the annex of that report. You got to wonder why they were hiding, or not, not to put words in their mouth, maybe not hiding, but keeping that more quiet than perhaps it should be. World Aquatics has in their report, and they've said essentially that, and they acknowledge that the swimming community has lost faith in the anti-doping system as a result of the Chinese case. Clearly, it wasn't handled properly. And they've said that the Chinese swimmers will be tested more than the others. But again, if you talk to experts, it depends, on what type of testing. Is it blood testing, or is it urine? When, how? Is it intelligence-led? We just sort of get these statements. We don't get that much more detail.
This is Bill Bock, the lawyer who works for USADA. Is also on the Aquatics Integrity Unit, the anti-doping advisory body of that. He's put a statement out, hasn't he, this week, saying that he thinks what should happen now is that the 23 cases should actually go forward to a hearing as they should have been done in 2021. That's the only way to restore the trust, and then they can have a proper hearing and do it properly, and then come to the decisions rather than just accepting the contamination claims.
And contamination, the word used by the International Olympic Committee media chief Mark Adams in the opening press conference in Paris. Also, that's a reminder how, however many reports and investigations the World Anti-Doping Agency and World Aquatics have put out in response to this all being exposed, this issue of the Chinese swimmers and the doping cases will be hanging over these Olympic Games, particularly as we build up to competition. So this is what happened when Mark Adams from the IOC was asked about it.
The contamination case with the Chinese athletes. And obviously this is a question better posed to WADA than to us, but from memory, I believe, by the way, that they were also tested, extra tested. Each one of them, I think, had 8 tests ahead of the Tokyo Games as well. And I believe I read, but I would like to check with WADA, that they're also, there are a group of athletes anyway who will be tested. The way that ITA works, as you know, is they pick out sports and individuals who they think should be tested more. There, I think I need to ask you to go and see WADA. But I will also remind you, as we already said many times, that there was a report by an independent prosecutor who found that WADA had acted properly, and that there seemed to be no case to answer. He had 3 other experts, independent experts on law, on science, and one other domain working with him. As far as we're concerned, the interim report, and we've had indications from the investigator that the full report will be the same, has found that there is no case to answer. But ITA particularly will continue to do targeted testing, and that may or may not include those athletes.
We're a few days or a couple of weeks away from the swimming, and honestly, the atmosphere on that pool deck will be extremely tense, and that's not fair on anyone. If this stuff can't be cleared up, not fair on maybe the Chinese athletes, not fair on their rivals. It's so difficult to win an Olympic swimming medal, and to have that tension kind of all around you, this makes it even harder.
And for many, it's hard to have faith in what they're watching at the Olympics or any sport when, as we've been discussing, there are ways of avoiding bans, evading action, perhaps authorities not wanting to be too stringent on certain athletes, certain countries. And that's why the IOC are facing all these questions as we build up to Paris.
Since we published the first stories about those 23 Chinese athletes testing positive for the banned drug trimetazidine, the IOC has wanted to keep its distance, its kind of hands clean from that situation. And again, on the press conference with Mark Adams, the IOC communications director, that was the look. Again, it was talking about ITA, the independent testing agency, and WADA and the like, and how they were responsible for this, even though for swimmers coming to the Olympics at their event, they want answers and the uncertainty assuaged. But, Mark Adams was saying, the ITA will continue to do targeted testing. That may or may not include those athletes, is his words. Well, I think people perhaps wanted more detail and perhaps more involvement from the IOC, given the worry and given the scale of what was revealed. The IOC has really tried to not get involved in any way, whether it feels it's too much of a political hot potato given China's involvement, or the fact that it wants to show that these anti-doping agencies are genuinely independent, and it is on a needs-to-know basis. It's for me, it's really hard to think so, given the way we know how sport works.
I think we have seen as well the bigger concern for the IOC might well have been about the infrastructure of these games, technology-wise, because a week or so out from the Olympics came that huge global IT meltdown caused by the CrowdStrike outage and that glitchy Microsoft update that sent so many computers around the world into meltdown. And that's indeed what happened with the Olympic Games systems in Paris, and they suddenly had an alert in the middle of Thursday night, and they had to rapidly try to find a fix for it. And Martyn, this was something you asked the IOC's Mark Adams about. Let's listen to the question and his answer.
I've been informed the CrowdStrike outage caused a sort of fairly significant impact on the IOC in 2024 systems. From my information is the Chief Technology Officer was alerted to this very, very early on and managed to secure a sort of early fix from CrowdStrike. But I guess with what happened in Pyeongchang before the opening ceremony in 2018, the issues of a malware attack are pretty significant as well. Can you just talk about that and what's in place to try and prevent a cyber attack and also a sort of system failure like the CrowdStrike one?
As you pointed out, it wasn't a cyber attack. It was actually a systems failure, which probably for those people working in the system doesn't make too much difference, but it obviously makes a difference for us. Yes, there were some significant problems on the morning of that, but I think it was pretty well dealt with. I'd say I'm not a technology expert, so I can't really speak too much about it, but I would say almost it was quite a good rehearsal. Cyber attacks are part of everyone's daily life nowadays, and phishing attempts everywhere, and for the Olympic Games, it's a huge target. Always used to be a media target and a campaign target, and now it's also a phishing and a target by those kind of attacks. We, needless to say, have a huge amount of safeguards in place. Both ourselves, our partners, and obviously Paris 2024. I obviously wouldn't go into what those were, even if I could explain what they were, which I can't, but I can tell you that we have been assured by our people and by our partners and by Paris 24 that we are very, very prepared. You can never be too prepared, but I think we had a pretty close call in Pyeongchang. So we have experience, we know what we're looking for, and I think as far as we can have every confidence that we know how to deal with it.
Mark Adams, the ISE presidential spokesman, didn't at all try and hide the impact of the CrowdStrike outage on the systems or downplay the threat of Russian cyber attacks. If anything, he talked them up and made it clear it's something I think that they are very worried about.
And it is quite notable how they are being a lot more specific on Russia and how they will talk about their concerns around Russia, given how on maybe certain other instances they are more cautious at the IOC in blaming people and going into specifics. But this obviously reflects the complete breakdown of relations with Russia following the state-sponsored doping, the cover-up of the cover-up then, and of course the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, ultimately leading to them being banned from the Olympics. But if we think back to 2018, it was referenced by Mark Adams there, that cyber attack that took place on the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, it was pretty widespread. It took out, I think, Wi-Fi internet systems, prevented spectators from getting ticket reservations, and that apparently led to empty seats. It impacted broadcasters' drones as well. And it was blamed on Russia's GRU military intelligence agency, something Russia does deny, but governments, including the UK, certainly did speak out about it, and they talked about the GRU cyber unit trying to disguise itself as North Korean and Chinese hackers when it targeted that opening ceremony. And it's why there can be those cyber fears around games, particularly attempts to sabotage. And in the case of 2018, there was allegedly attempts to try to disable computers and wipe data that would have really prevented the entire organisation of the games. And in 2020, at the time of the planned Tokyo Games, before they were postponed due to the pandemic, the British government again said that there was an apparent cyber reconnaissance by the GRU against officials and organisations in an attempt to again disrupt those Olympic Games. And we've seen how the IC president Thomas Bach has been targeted by a hoax phone call from a Russian group, and that was an attempt what's pretending to be from the African Union Commission. And this is something that Tariq asked Mark Adams about in the opening press conference in Paris.
You anticipate Russia will carry on with some of these activities we've seen in the build-up to the Games? And has there been any direct efforts to contact Russia? I mean, they hosted the Olympics in Sochi and they're known to the Olympic family. Has there been any kind of attempts to say, would you mind not pretending to be an African Union official and calling Thomas back? And can we get through these Olympics?
To my knowledge, we haven't been in contact with anyone directly to discuss that issue. Clearly, there is a campaign of some sort going on. It's not the first time that the IOC, or the last time that the IOC, the Olympic Games, will be target to misinformation and so on. And you've seen it very clearly, and particularly with the film, it's getting more and more sophisticated, particularly with the Tom Cruise film. I'm afraid, again, it's one of those things that we have to live with in the world, and I wouldn't want to kind of speculate further about what we might face or what's going to happen, because I think that actually can end up being a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But it's part of the world, the divided world that we live in.
The IOC's Mark Adams there again, and a first reference perhaps to Tom Cruise here on Sport Unlocked. The reason why is because something revealed last month by Microsoft, and it was this AI-generated audio impersonation of Tom Cruise in an apparent fake documentary, Olympics Has Fallen. It was all attempting to mimic the Olympus Has Fallen film from, about a decade or so ago, and this fake Tom Cruise was disparaging the IOC leadership, all an attempt to undermine the upcoming Olympics as an apparent part of pro-Kremlin disinformation campaigning and activism. So fake documentaries, just the latest malign influence campaigns.
I think from the response of Mark Adams, that they're anticipating that the Russia disinformation campaign, the Russian efforts to destabilize the Olympics will continue during the Games. They appear to be weary of these efforts, and they know the no words they can use are going to stop those. That's why I suppose they've been kind of proactive in terms of pointing them out, because as Adams said, that the efforts have become more sophisticated, potentially fooling a lot of people. We mentioned the African Union official who managed to speak to Thomas Bach. It's important for them to point that out, because this stuff will be released by the Russians regardless. It's going to be an interesting 3 weeks. It's hard to think that there won't be attempts, and maybe successful attempts, by the time the Games are finished.
And of course, a complete ban on Russia competing at these Olympics, along with war ally Belarus. And unlike in Tokyo and previous games when they were serving their doping punishments and they were known as ROC for the Russian Olympic Committee, this time the only Russians competing will be known as, and you'll hear this phrase a lot, individual neutral athletes. And there can't be any Russian flag, no colours linked to that, no red, white and blue, no anthem at all. And to be eligible to compete as neutrals, the Russians had to show they had no links at all to the Russian war machine or indeed the military or state security services. So only about a dozen or so athletes from Russia as neutrals competing. And what about the competitions themselves? There's a lot of the politics, a lot of doping issues, but Martyn, obviously the priority for Paris is a successful games, lots of full stadiums, everyone getting excited, athletes enjoying themselves. You have already written about how there'll be no McDonald's, will there be in the athlete village? There will, though, be Michelin star chefs producing food for the athletes. What about the venues and ticket sales?
I think the organisers in Paris are a little bit sensitive about the fact that they are still got so many tickets available so close to the game starting for some very high-profile events. The blue ribbon events, the 100 metres finals, men's and women's, the 1500 metres finals, cycling, swimming, all these things which certainly, for example, in London 2012 sold out very quickly. They're all still available. So that is, they've hit their budgetary targets in terms of income from tickets, but they don't want to have empty seats. That would be slightly embarrassing.
Well, you've certainly fired the starting gun there on empty seat stories, always a hallmark of any Olympic Games. Make sure your pod feed's though on empty. Hit subscribe and we land in your feeds automatically. But from Martyn, Tariq, myself, Rob, thank you as ever for listening to this episode building up to the Olympics. For now, goodbye.